Hola, buenas tardes. Hello, everyone. My name is Ivan Salinas, Programs Manager here at Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center. I want to welcome you to the Wanda Coleman Theater for the life, literature, and legacy of Luis J. Rodríguez. Let's give a round of applause to our guest this evening. Just a few words to start our afternoon. Beyond Baroque is an organization dedicated to the artistic possibilities of language by cultivating new writing, presenting contemporary literature and art, and building a diverse community of poets. I want to acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tongva peoples. We acknowledge the wrong done to these peoples through settler colonialism and genocidal practices. As a literary arts organization, we are committed to uplifting indigenous communities, their stories, and cultures. Beyond Baroque itself was founded in 1968 by George Drury Smith. We started out as an experimental literary magazine until it evolved into the interdisciplinary art space it is today. And this building first served as the original Venice City Hall. And since the late 70s, it has been a home for multidisciplinary artists and writers. For our weekly programming series, we will be heading into June, which will be Pride Month, and we are hosting a blues night with Tom and Robert, Back Porch Blues, as we like to call it, and we are also hosting book launches for Michelle Jacobs and Audrey Shipp on Juneteenth. She is releasing her new collection of poetry, Poetry in Afro-Diaspora. And we're also planning a tribute for Spanish poet Federico Garcia Lorca, in celebration of what would be his 90th birthday. And if you like Beyond Baroque, want to help art spaces thrive, you can support by coming to our fundraisers and also becoming a member. Memberships start at $75 with discount prices available to students, and you can become a member to get access to events for free, discounts on our bookstore, and original merch. Big thank you to the Beyond Baroque team. We have Eric Alberg in the booth handling tech and the live stream as well. And we also have Rhiannon Cielos Chavez in the bookstore today. After the reading, you can purchase several of the books that Luis has authored, as well as Ben Valdez Olguín. And I think we may have some of Joe Metcalf's books in there. But a huge shout out and really grateful for the Global Latinidades Center, led by Ben Valdez Olguín, for their generous support and their organization for today's program, and grateful to co-editor Josephine Metcalf of this wonderful book for helping tell the story of a literary icon, and now an international icon, that is Luis J. Rodríguez. We are going to first hear from the editors and from the man himself. And after that, we'll be leading a Q&A. We'll take some questions from the audience, and we'll conclude with a reception and book signing afterwards. So to start off, welcome Ben V. Olguín, who is the Robert and Lisa Erickson Presidential Chair in English at the University of California at Santa Barbara. Olguín's research and teaching include service learning projects in community centers and schools in underserved communities, as well as in prisons, juvenile jails, and immigrant detention centers. As founder and director of the Global Latinidades Center, Olguín has received over $2.1 million in grants, which help support multiple educational and community-based initiatives. Please welcome Ben. Oh, okay. Save that bio. And let's go with first Dr. Josephine Metcalf, who is a reader and in American Studies and Criminology at the University of Hull in the United Kingdom, where she has research interests in how and why people may read and write in contexts of confinement. Jo has edited anthologies of poetry and prose for people in prison, as well as prison staff, and with Ben Olguín is the co-editor of the Life, Literature, and Legacy of Luis J. Rodríguez. And lastly, Luis J. Rodríguez, who is an American poet, novelist, journalist, critic, and columnist. He was the 2014 Los Angeles Poet Laureate and Rodríguez is recognized as a major figure in contemporary Chicano literature, identifying himself as a native Chicanx writer. His best-known work, Always Running, La Vida Loca, Gang Days in LA, received the Carl Sandburg Literary Award and has been controversial on school reading lists for its depictions of gang life. Just remember to always read banned books. That's the best ones out there. All right. So let's hear from the man himself, Luis J. Rodríguez, who will be reading some poems, talking a bit more about the book. Gracias, Luis. Gracias.
Thank you all. Thank you for being here, man, especially on a holiday weekend. I'm gonna read 3 relatively short poems, but I want to just read ones I don't normally read that much. So this is called Suburbia, and it's got a line from the last poet, Felipe Luciano, that goes, "Oppression makes even God smell foul." Reading the newspaper, I feel like an accomplice. A voyeur is also guilty of something. So the murders, the corruptions, and calculated larcenies against the spirit dwell in me too. It's easy, I suppose, to pretend I don't pay rent to the conspiracies, and that the church is immune because it's tax exempt. But from a landfill or cemetery grow multicolored flowers. Who can say then from what polluted soils my blossoms will spring? By the way, poets don't get much money, so when you applaud, that's our best currency. Just so you know. It's okay. So this one's called Perhaps. Perhaps when the stories are lost and pleasure is a dry river, and what makes the flesh sing is a long-gone supplication, we may find our true names. Perhaps when the earth's rotation stops, when the moon has wilted and the sun's rays scorch down this squandered ground, we may uncover our inner eye. Perhaps when the poisons that once were our sustenance and the radiations that once gave us light now foster our insatiable hungers and an abiding darkness, we may know what really feeds and guides us. Perhaps after we created so many borders, so many walls, and conjured up even more laws to make more lawless, we may realize it's ourselves who have been illegal. It's our spirits we've alienized. Perhaps when parents lose their final grasp on their children, they will finally grasp that their sole purpose is to bring loved, healthy, and understood children into this world to remake the universe better and more holy each time. Perhaps when the wars in the names of countless gods, which look and act like those who invoke them, finally end, we may realize that God is the unnameable, unobtrusive wind that caresses our cheeks, the rain that falls on us all, the air that enters our lungs, and the nerves in our brains, so we can name whatever God we want. Perhaps when all the textbooks and written histories and science papers cease, we'll understand that nature and our own natures are the source of all knowledge, language, and histories, and we'll always be able to rewrite them, reimagine them, and reweave them into the world. Perhaps when love has become the embers of what we hate, the residue of what we've destroyed, we'll know that love is the stream that flows through each and every one of us, the water we thirst for in the desert of our days, the ocean from which all our tears, full of salt and unmet desires, surge and flow. So, and this last one is one requested by Ben because he's going to actually talk about it. So it's called Tombstone Poets, and I don't really write about my my heroin use when I was a teenager that much. I haven't always running somewhat, but this is a poem about one of the people who I used to chip with, as we used to call it, Tombstone Poets. Leaning against fractured tombstones, we wove poems, Micaela and me, grabbing strands from sunken lives, creating an alchemy of words interlaced with a needle-induced glow, sparking prose out of the poverty of unreason. Ragged memories push tongues into cheap chatter, recalling port wine jail nights, the terror time between 2 a.m. and the first light of day without lovers. And the Tecata look in her smile, so distant even as she gazed into my eyes here beneath an east side sun. Precious, 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 the noon hours at Evergreen Cemetery. Paper lunch bags at our side. Even now, I hear the humming from her soul. But heroin took her home from me. Strings of words suspended in mist, like broken webs, only protruding headstones remain. Mute witnesses to when life glowed a fire, when Micaela and me wove tempestuous silk, leaning on slabs of chips stone. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you all for being here this afternoon. And as you said, Louise, thank you to Eric and Yvonne and everyone here at Beyond Baroque. I have been so excited about this event. And of course, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you, Ben. Now we've finally seen the anthology come to fruition. And Louise, always a pleasure to hear you read. But can I just give a really quick shout out first, please? Ben and I put a lot of years of work into this book, but really the people who did all the hard work were the contributors. And it is so exciting to see here today. We have Trini, we have Tony, we have John and Jose, and we have Christian as well. And thank you all so much for being here. It's amazing. So this really is just as much about you guys and the contributions you made to the book as it is about Louise, Ben and myself here today. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes, if I may, to tell you a little bit about how I came to be interested in Louise's work, because it has actually been quite a personal journey getting to this point. And I'm going to tell you a little bit as well about how the project generally got off the ground. And then Ben's going to say a little bit as well about how he came to the anthology as well. So, to understand basically how this book came about, if I can have a slide, please. In 1994, I actually need to take you back over 30 years. So in 1994, I started an undergraduate degree at the University of Hull in the north of England. Has anyone here been to Hull, apart from my mum, Louise and Trini? Yay, and Christian and Jose, of course you did. I couldn't forget that. Anyone else? Hull, do we know where Hull is? Yes.
Where the hell is it?
Well, that is a joke we get quite often. It is up in the north of Yorkshire, all right? So it's on the east coast. So yeah, east coast of England. Now, back in those days, when I started my undergraduate degree in 1994 in Hull, if you majored in American studies at that time, it was, much to the delight of every undergraduate student, compulsory to do a year studying in America. And this is all completely free and government funded, because this is before we ever had tuition fees in the UK. So when I was doing my year in the US, I was lucky enough to be placed at UC Santa Cruz. And while I was there, I volunteered with a project called Barrios Unidos, which, as its website states, at that time was very much focused on preventing and interrupting gang violence. Because of my interest in that area, I then walked into a bookstore in Santa Cruz one day and I saw a memoir called Always Running by someone called Luis Rodríguez. It said it was about gangs in California. So I bought the book and I read it that day. When I finally went back to my final year of university in Hull, and yes, it was devastating to go back to Hull after Santa Cruz, I had to write a 15,000-word undergraduate thesis, and I wrote it on the American street gang phenomenon, and particularly on how memoirs, such as Always Running by Luis, helped us to understand those factors that might lead someone towards the gang. By gang, I don't just mean the pathological aspects, but the community, the affiliations, the family even, but the more problematic stuff too, which I've basically been covering in my research work for the last few decades. Next slide, please, Eric. In 2005, then, I started a PhD in American Studies at the University of Manchester, which is no longer on the East Coast. We've moved across to the West Coast now in England. For my thesis, for my PhD thesis, my graduate work, I focused specifically on street gang memoirs, such as those by Luis, but also by authors such as Sanyika Shakur and Stanley Tookie Williams. I interviewed Luis twice for that graduate work, and I did lots of focus groups in Los Angeles high schools, exploring how young young people engaged with Always Running, Louise's memoir. And that thesis would then eventually become my first book. I then did another interview with Louise in 2014. That was for another academic journal called the Milas Journal. And then Ben Olguín got in touch with me in 2017 and invited me to write a chapter on Louise's work for the Oxford Encyclopedia of Latina and Latino Literature. Ben was working as an editor on that. So I wrote that chapter for Ben's collection for the Oxford Handbook, but I felt really guilty as I started writing it because I realised up until that point I really had only been focused on Always Running. Now, as many of you here know, Always Running is supposedly the most stolen book in the Los Angeles public library system. So it is a very important book for us all to study. You know, it is a very important book in its own way. It speaks to the community from where it comes. But I remember thinking at that moment how much more there was to do on Louise's work, whether it was on his poetry, his essays, his children's books. We knew that other scholars had written kind of individual pieces about just one aspect of Louise's work. But there really was something more comprehensive that needed to be done, something that took into account his activities as an activist, as a politician, as a tutor in prison. There was just so much more that needed to be done. So just this past week, I dug out an email that I sent to Ben in 2018, which I know seems ages ago now. If I could have the next slide, please, Eric. And basically, I just said to Ben, I haven't stopped thinking about Louise's life and works. We need to do something about this. And Ben said, let's do it. I'm fully on board. Let's get an anthology going. So we put out a call for chapter proposals from academics on any aspect of Louise's life and works. Ben and I were adamant from the outset we wanted to support early career scholars and graduate students, as well as more experienced academics. And we also knew from the outset that we very much wanted global perspectives on Louise as well. We knew that he'd done so much work in so many different countries across the globe. We wanted those perspectives on what people were doing with his writings as well. But it soon became apparent to us that academics just weren't going to be able to cut it alone. We needed artists, we needed other writers, we needed musicians, we needed formerly incarcerated people. We needed all of them to also give their perspectives on Louise as well. Academics alone couldn't make sense of the decades of the work, and also what other readers and consumers had then done with the work as well. So, next slide, please, Eric. We would ultimately end up with 32 contributors, 12 of whom were non-academics, and we also had some original pieces of writing from Louise too, so 33 if we include you, Louise. And 11 of those academics were based beyond the US as well, which was very important to us. Academics, sorry if you're academics, but academics are often stereotyped as being kind of aloof or solitary creatures. But I would say that actually we thrive on collaborative projects. Ben and I took a very generative approach to developing the chapters and the pieces for this anthology. And if you contributors remember, back in the pandemic, we ran 2 days of those online workshops where the contributors were invited to present their concepts and drafts, and then Ben and I would provide feedback. But it was also actually, those workshops were an opportunity for the other contributors to feed back to one another as well and find out what each other were doing as well. As Ben says, we workshopped the hell out of those papers. In spring 2022 then, the University of Hull was honoured to host the annual BAS conference. That's the British Association for American Studies, as Jose and Christian know. And with kind sponsorship from Ben's Global Latinidades project at UCSB, we brought together 10 of those contributors to the anthology, and they spoke in 3 panels across 3 days at Hull. And was that not the best conference you've ever been to? Yes. See? Now, in the background there, I was working hard to set up a unique university-prison partnership, and basically what we did, we asked all the conference presenters for their permission to record their papers, and we then screened them on in-cell television at Hull Prison locally, or HMP Hull is its formal title. So in the prison, we showed all those papers about Rodríguez, and then in the aftermath of that, with a research assistant, I ran months of book groups in the prison, whereby we read some of the key texts that some of those conference papers had explored. And of course, in the prison at that time, we read Always Running, we read From Our Land to Our Land, the collection of essays as well, and we read some of Louise's poetry as well. And actually, I ended up being so fascinated by the ways in which those men worked with Louise's readings and how they understood them and how they read them, that I ended up doing another chapter for the anthology that was exclusively on that. Slide, please, Eric. In fact, as well as editing everything with Ben, I would also author the following 4 chapters. So I'm right in the way here. Now, I will just mention, I started these chapters as an American studies scholar, a cultural studies scholar, but halfway through the book, I was actually moved to a criminology department for budgetary reasons, and because I had been doing more and more field work in prisons. So I did become increasingly interested in cultural criminology, and you can probably guess that that certainly informed a couple of these chapters, not least the first one on the slide, where I did interview some of the formerly incarcerated people that Luis worked with when he'd run creative writing workshops at Lancaster Prison for years. My favourite chapter, though, if I had to choose one of my favourite chapters, is the one that I wrote on Luis's archives, because several years ago, some of you are aware that UCSB purchased Luis's papers and put them all in the special research collections at UCSB. It's a quite remarkable collection, not least because when it first arrived, there were 250 boxes. As I understand, they hadn't seen a collection that size for some time, and it's still going as well. So I spent several weeks in those archives. Ben and I were the first people to go in and look at them and see what was there. And it really was quite an electrifying experience, because we found papers in there such as arrest cards or some of the rejection letters that Always Running had first received, that of course Luis talks about in the memoir itself. But it made me think, because there's a scholar called Henry Bartholomew Cox, and he writes about how archivists do something called educated snooping. And he says that basically a researcher's intentions are very honourable when they go into an archive, but actually they may sometimes become a bit of an unwelcome guest, or it may indeed feel like educated snooping. And this became a very strange activity for me. Could I have the next slide, please, Eric? It became very strange for me because I suddenly realised that I was reading my own correspondence with Luis from over 25 years ago. So it's actually over 30, or around 30 years ago now. And this indeed was back when I'd been at University of California, Santa Cruz. So that archive is always, that chapter on the archives is always a little bit special to me. But and I will add as well, it's interesting, that chapter about the archives, because it does remind us as well that academic work is often very personal. We talk about the public humanities, and indeed centres like this, Baron Baroque here, are doing much to, get the humanities out into the community, and certainly more than, ever today in today's cultural and political climate, that's so important. But actually as well, it reminds us that humanities are not just public, they're also very personal sometimes as well. So so this was a very personal experience for me. But if I may, just to close my few minutes, I just want to read a couple of paragraphs from the anthology's introduction, in which Ben and I talk about what the book itself is actually about. So this is the introduction. Rodríguez has regularly been referred to as a superhero in Chicano literature, and he can certainly be deemed a classic Chicanx author in many respects, given his attention to experiences of migration, questions about identity formation, and his embarking on the Red Road. That is, his reclamation of his indigenous heritage through private ceremonial practices and public commitments. But what arguably sets Rodríguez apart from his fellow Chicanx authors is his steadfast allegiance to proletarian politics and his concerns for the working classes, allegiances which have led him into prisons, underclass social groups, and leftist political parties, just as much as they have led him to pick up a pen. While consideration of his literary career alone would be enough to fill the pages of any anthology, after all, he's published 2 testimonials, multiple books of poetry and short stories, non-fiction essays, and young adult and children's literature. This book contends that we need to consider his ongoing community activism, which is intertwined with his literary work, and to do so through those who have witnessed and participated in it with him. Moreover, Rodríguez's wide-ranging work intersects with foundational discourses in Chicanx and Latinx studies, as well as related topical issues in the contemporary US and beyond. His activity abroad in over 50 countries, whether as a published author or a visiting activist and public speaker, is testament to the universality of his work to illuminate and intervene into the plight of the underclasses, the workers, abused and wounded survivors of violence, and the material and spiritual dimensions of reclaiming humanity at the personal, interpersonal, and global levels. The work of this multifaceted anthology, then, is to recover, feature, and recognize Rodríguez's work so as to address his still underappreciated and underacknowledged contributions as an author and community-based intellectual and activist. And we do this alongside critical assessments of the complexities and indeed contradictions that emerge in his public persona, personal life, community work, and especially his oeuvre. Thank you.
We're going to have a lot of time to talk with Luis and with me and Joe and about the personal relationship to this work. But what I want to do, if we can start with the other set of slides, is it would be the other one. There should be another set, but I don't think they're together, but it's okay. The key is I want to just share why I devoted 5 years of my personal and professional life to this, because he's worth it. The work is worth it. The people who contributed are worth it, but it's also intersecting with my own life too. And I won't indulge too much into that, but there might be a few photos with some really pathological gunplay in my youth, just to share. They're probably not necessary, but so I know people here have lived much more of this than I have. One of my brothers certainly has. And I'm talking about life in a barrio, right? And not just having your house in the barrio, but being of the barrio, either claiming like I did or actually being jumped into a barrio. Another thing that we shared is not just that background, but that concientización that came through relationships that came through by encounters of, for me, artists, primarily poets. I happen to have lived in Houston, where Arte Público Press is based, so there was always a trail of authors, and to my surprise, I didn't even know this thing existed, but to my surprise, and we can go 2-3 slides, Pinto poets. And in fact, the editor, couple more slides, please. The editor and publisher, another slide or two, of Arte Público Press would give me all the damaged books that I would send to my tío in prison. And he was, this is bullshit. This one. He goes, this is good. And that was Ricardo Sanchez. He loved Ricardo Sanchez's poetry because it was raw, really unedited, and just like in your face. And as I said, we can go to another photo, but this is me right here with the Smith & Wesson, and this guy's got a 45. Pendeja, that's right. We can go to the other one. But I'm coming from this similar background. Thankfully, I'll just leave it at that. And these artists, especially Ricardo Sanchez, is the one who introduced me to the Revolutionary Communist Party. And I started working with them and through their immigrant arms organizing unit called La Resistencia. And that was part of yet other transformations, led me to be a volunteer, believe it or not, in the FMLN. Thankfully, I got injured in Mexico City, so I didn't get to fight. I'm technically not an internationalist fighter, but I definitely volunteered and went through the process of vetting before a pendejada kept me from going. But nonetheless, it was the writers who were turning me on to this, and they were more than just writers, and that's why I'm 100% committed to getting this work out, because Luis is not just a writer. He's not just an artist. So what I'd like to do, if I can, is follow up a little bit on the poem that Luis wrote if we can get to the other poem. Pardon me? The poem is next, right? Yeah. I'd like to give you a sample of the analysis that at least I'm bringing, because as Joe mentioned, there's so many visions. We have the great Densmore from The Doors, giving his own inflection as a musician. We have the journalists. We have the party people, the activists. We have other artists. We have a range of people. Mine is as an academic, trying to understand how Luis has found a way to make multiple syntheses, has found a way to validate the underclass life as theoretical subjects of history and as theorizing subject of history, as people who make history. And this poem that he read, Tombstone Poets, is an example of a really brilliant mind at work that has always been partisan to the underclasses, and specifically the lumpen and the proletarian. So I'm just going to read a very short excerpt. It's going to be just 2 paragraphs. And this is from an essay called Towards a Chicanx Communist Synthesis of the Organic Intellectual, Luis J. Rodríguez's Revolutionary Lumpen Proletarian Gnosis and Praxis. It's academies for saying his revolutionary shit, right? You know, as I told Luis, and I keep repeating this, but, you know, this book, I think, could open up some doors, or it could contribute to people's already mutterings about Luis as a Nobel laureate, right? This book is in the hands of a Nobel Prize nominator. But as I also mentioned, it could kill his cells because we bring out the Marxist aspects of his foundation. There's even a photo in the archive that shows him running for school board under a Vote Communist, Vote Luis. You know, I think there it is right there. It's actually real. I'm not making this shit up, man. This guy was doing, he was like with the plebe for a long time. So here's how I try to bring this significance to the readers and to people in our classes and in community centers like this. So if you permit me, I'll begin this brief part of the analysis. Luis is less concerned with how incomprehensible all this might seem to petty bourgeois readers, that is, the scene in his poem, right, of heroin addicts, or anyone else for whom this setting, scene, and discourse might appear dissonant. This is not to say that Tombstone Poets is illegible to non-tecatos or people outside Chicano barrios. On the contrary, this poem, which appeared before his best-selling Always Running, is part of a vernacular or underclass signifying that Rodriguez's audience has learned how to read, in large part by his accompanying explications via his globe-trotting speaking agenda and related other writings. More than anything, this poem is fundamentally about the salience of underclass Chicano agency and this oft-maligned subject's awareness of the human situation, however ironic the situation might be. Indeed, amid the poet's recollection that empathy and love exist even among the most alienated and alien of human beings, and alongside his reflections of the deceitfully soothing repose that opium offers from the alienation of wage labor that is the apex of options for people in this racialized class segment, he also meditates on the tempestuous silk that he and his now gone lover once wove. That is, the poem is about a bond among underclass drug addicts and ex-convicts, and it is also a testament to their shared language and network of signifiers that involves nonverbal as well as verbal communications. Although their gestures and utterances are at times garbled and fading, this pair of subaltern Chicana and Chicano subjects are nonetheless mutually understood. This point is underscored and compounded by the poet's writing about a range of assorted underclass scenes and archetypes in other poems before and after Tombstone Poets. These include Lucinda, Palmas, Somebody Was Breaking Windows, Walk Late Chicago, and these which appear among broader meditations on existentialist themes like String Bean, The Calling, Running to America, as well as overtly political poems about the micro and macro political economy within which the poet's earlier underclass life with Micaela was undermined. One piece is called No Work Today. Another is called The Monster, Alabama, Juchitlan, Overtown 1984, and Tomatoes. In response to the old yet salient provocation, can the subaltern speak? Rodríguez parallels Gayatri Spivak's conclusion, albeit from a radically different class background. She was an aristocrat. Luis is not, of course, and his response is, of course they can and do speak, even if the upper classes cannot really hear them, much less understand or even care about them or their speech acts. Moreover, Rodríguez shows that subaltern tegatos, along with the large gallery of other outsiders and maligned precariat masses, speak and also theorize on multiple registers about every aspect of the human situation and the cosmos too. I go on to explain how he actually challenges some very strong under-theorized parts of Marxist theories about the lumpen proletariat. People hate the lumpen. That's addicts, people out of work, inmigrantes, because they see them as maybe breaking unions and undermining working class agency. And Luis says, no, there are people too. If we don't bring the lumpen with us, it's not a revolution. No one is left out. And he theorizes this in a way different than I was speaking right here in this writing, right? In lay terms, in terms that we need to be able to talk about and to use so that we do build cross-cultural and multidimensional coalitional politics. So this is the value, I think, that in summary of all of Luis's work, he's working on different registers. You know, the literati, the lumpen, students, workers, and he's been all of these. And that's, to me, probably the most valuable part of who he embodies. And that's why I'm committed to getting this work out. So thank you all, and we're going to have a chance to talk to him and us about this project. Gracias. All right, thank you. All right.
That's maybe. It's fine though.
All right. You want us up there?
Yeah, please, yeah.
Hi everyone. Thank you for holding on a little bit. Yes, check your mic first.
Hello.
I think it works.
All right. Let's start with a round of applause once again to our editors and to Ms. J. Rodríguez. You've all shared both extensively about the work on collecting so many voices to tell the life story of Luis J. Rodríguez. And I wanted to start with a quick question for Luis, because I think we heard a bit less from you, Luis, but I think this is a different book, contrasting from the compiled works that tell your evolution as a writer, letting the work speak for itself when you do collected poems or even your own memoirs. So I'm interested in, at this point in your life, what does it feel like to have a book that compiles your life experience and your own poetics, but through the voices of the people that you have met across your life?
The only way that I can say that it really matters to me in the sense of the disconnects that have been part of my life, and I think most of you have touched upon it. People don't know all the things that I am. When I became Poet Laureate Los Angeles, people saw me a certain way. when it came out, they saw me a certain way. You know what I'm saying? They don't see the integral person that I am, and it's hard for people to understand that. I was, and still am. I don't denounce anything that I've done as a communist or Marxist, but I've expanded on it, you know, because what I became, especially the last 30 years, was going into my indigenous roots, which is also in the book. And that to me was important because there's a University of the Port Journal. If you go online, look them up, me and Trini wrote a piece on the indigenous, what's it called, Trini? I forget, but the indigenous cosmology for revolutionaries, how it works. Because what we were exploring is, when I went to my indigenous roots, and I'm glad John Dismore's here too, because he was actually there when I first tried to do that, 1994, John, at that event with Michael Meade. I was not interested or knew about indigeneity. I just didn't. Among all those men, and they're men from all walks of life, but there was a very important primal thing about going back to the root, going back to our indigenous, and that it helped me. That was 32 years ago. And it helped solidify everything, because what it gave me was my own Raramuri roots in Chihuahua, going back to the Mexica, and then of course finding elders among the Dene, Lakota, and others that we have already in this country, an intellectual cosmological route to a society that's just and beneficial for everyone. You know what I'm trying to say? So it wasn't just limited to what people can say it's just Western cosmologies or Western thinking. It was very much in the land, that we have in the land the idea that this country should be shared well-being for everyone. That is what I want to explore. That's what I wanted to do. And all my writing begins to move that way. So there's a spiritual component, there's a mental thinking component, there's an intuitive component, there's history, there's all kinds of ways to look at this. And that's what me and Trini have been exploring, but why I found the book to be important, because it kind of puts it together. I'm sorry I went all the way around it, but just important to point out, you have one book that kind of begins to bring that integrality together for me.
If I can add one thing, Cristian Vasquez and co-author Natalia Toscano, who's in New Mexico, both graduate students, actually have a very precise and quite well done article on Luis's Marxist indigenous paradigm that he's developed in collaboration with Trini through their radio show and through a lot of other activities. It's the Red Road in both sentidos. And again, give credit to Cristian. We made him revise. He revised that thing the most. That article was revised more times than any other one. But they got it right, and that's what that signifies. They were going to do whatever they needed to do to get it right, and that's a hard thing to do. Talk about Marxism and indigeneity, but it's a living artifact in the way they do their politics.
Yeah, I mean, that feels like it would be a big subject to tackle and argue with both ideologies. You as the director of the Global Latinidad Center, UC Santa Barbara, I just want to point out the sort of important Chicanx history there, that's where the Plan de Santa Barbara was signed in 1969, establishes the framework for Chicanx studies. But this is, I see this as a continuation of that history, that legacy on campus, but it's going international. The homeboy intellectual is known now worldwide, right? But yeah, I wonder with you, Ben, your own involvement as the co-editor, what more can you tell us about compiling Luis's work?
Well, it's best understood by returning to your point about the Plan de Santa Barbara, because that was both a successful and a failed enterprise. It succeeded in introducing ethnic studies, specifically Chicano studies, but their materialist component, because they were always looking towards being involved with the community, that was lost immediately. The field professionalized. And ironically, at that same time, there was a Chicano Maoist on campus who was challenging that. They actually broke with Mecha and started a group called Raza Libre that was internationalists working with the SDS and various internationalist groups. And what he was doing was modeling what we're trying to do with the Global Latinidades, is make that dialectic between the local and the global a palpable thing, a workshop of sorts. That's why we've sent people everywhere, like Egypt, Ghana, various parts of Europe, Oaxaca. We've had workshops. Maria was the person here in the audience was also involved in our workshop in Madrid. We sent people to Vancouver, Canada. I can't even go into Canada. I'm banned from Canada for being a criminal, basically. And I'm married to a Canadian too, and I can't even go to Canada. It's crazy, right? But we've sent people there to work with a Chilean exile who was actually part of a cadre that was supposed to assassinate Pinochet. She was one of the pilots plotting it out. So she's in exile there in Canada still to this day, can't really go back to Chile. And we sent 3 students to work with her to see how she's organizing and writing plays in local context with an internationalist perspective. So that's how we're doing this, and this is right up their alley. I mean, there's nothing more local than school board, and nothing more international than the slogan below that says "Vote Communist." So that's what we're about.
That's right. I wish I could see more of that and these ballots, for this year. But yeah, and I do want to ask something about politics in Luis's life, but do want to hear from Josephine on there's a whole chapter on prison writing workshops, and your research has also focused on individuals writing in confinement. But can you talk a little bit more about what that work was like with Luis? Yeah.
So again, as I started to say earlier, from the earliest days of Ben and I planning the anthology, and then of course when we started to delve into the archive as well, we just realised there was so much more behind the scenes that we needed to be exploring and paying attention to. And it's quite interesting. So I ended up for one of the chapters interviewing Ramiro, Luis's son, who's done a lot of work in prisons with him, looking and running the workshops with you as well in prison, but then 3 other people who, as I said, used to be at Lancaster State Prison, where Luis worked for years. And it was really important that we actually interview them, ask them literally the details about how the workshops ran. What did Luis do? Where did he stand? What were the exercises he gave you? What was the atmosphere in the room like? And it's really important, actually, because we were talking about studying prison literature earlier, we often study the literature, but we need to know how it's been produced as well. And so that was a really important chapter. And again, that idea about, unpicking things behind the scenes about how Luis works and what he's done and how he motivated the men in that room and so on. Yeah.
Let me just add something, because that's another part of the disconnect. The work I did in prisons is really important. 45 years I've dedicated, and it was my connection to me being in jails as a young person. I was in 8 jails, juvenile hall, and 2 adult facilities. But I was able to escape, I say escape, get pulled out of it because of the communist radical wing of the Chicano movement. That helped me not want to go back to jail for criminal acts. But I never forgot that my whole community, my body, or my family members were all getting caught up. Jail became a way to deal with the section of the working class that couldn't be accommodated by capitalism. Those people that couldn't get the jobs, there weren't enough jobs that were being pushed out. Well, this jail and got worse, mass incarceration got worse and worse. As the economy got deindustrialized, more people couldn't work. As the neighborhoods like in Chicago and LA where I lived were whole steel mills and plants and stockyards gone, prison became their answer. So I went back to prison to do these workshops. But the thing about it, you got to know how to negotiate that, because I don't want to just teach writing. I'm teaching about I call the keys of liberation. for your mind, for your spirit, for who you are. That to me is what I do in my classes. And then she was able to capture that. That's what I was trying to do with some of the guys that were in it. Plus, I have to say something about Ramiro, my son. Not only did he help me with it, but he did close to 15 years in prison. So he also had that going in, and it's changed his life now. Now he's working in jails, but he's working in community. He's working in schools as a gang interventionist in Chicago. So he's doing the same thing that I ended up doing, giving back after all those years he did in prison, to let go of the criminal aspects, the drugs and everything, and the very violent things that he was involved in, and start giving back to the healing, the liberation of the mind and soul and spirit in those institutions.
Wow. Yeah.
Did you want to say something, Ben?
No, I'd like to hear from audience questions.
All right, well, just jump to that.
Could I add something very, very quickly, just on the prison note? Would that be all right? Sure. Sorry, I was just going to say very, very quickly, it was so interesting to me. So I interviewed a number of people that Luis had worked with at Lancaster, but then when I ran the book groups at Hull Prison as well, and the two groups of men, and we've spoken about this before, it was interesting to me because, a bit of a cliche, but I thought they might really enjoy always running, but they actually preferred from our land to our land. And they were really interested in this idea of Nemechtili, which I've totally pronounced wrong again. But it's, do you want to explain? It's the indigenous idea about spirituality.
Yeah, it's a Mexico concept of everything has a spirit. So when you're in a classroom or you're trying to teach, it isn't just teaching something, it's tapping into the spirit of teaching, but also the spirit of learning. Because a good teacher doesn't just teach. If they don't have that spirit of teaching, tapping into the spirit of learning, nobody's going to learn. And good teachers do that intuitively. Nobody has to tell them that, so it isn't just curriculum and what's on the board and everything else. And them being both teachers know this. You have to tap into that spirit, which is already innate in people. I want to learn. I want to advance. I want to teach me, show me the ropes, teach me something. And that's what we do. And it's called Nemechtili. And I think that's why they grasp that part of it.
I'm curious, and if the workshop model that facilitator like Luis, is it unique to the American prison system that the facilitator is sort of liberating the the students in that class? Is it unique to the United States? Like, have you seen that in your own research outside of the U.S.?
I think we don't have a Luis equivalent in English prisons.
Yeah,
no, in all seriousness though. So, I mean, the UK prison system, much like here, massively underfunded, struggling to do extracurricular programs like creative writing, and they do rely quite heavily on, for example, support from academics and, community groups and so on and so forth. But have I ever seen a workshop run similarly? No, I haven't. I mean, I'm not just saying.
But she was able to get me to 2 prisons in England, which was really cool.
Yeah, so I've seen Luis
and one I have to say, Trini came in and she did Nahuatl songs and also a healing circle along with the writing workshops. And so I don't know why I was surprised. They really went to it. And at first they're always like, who is this guy? They're checking you out. They're testing you. Do you really, do you know the life and all this kind of stuff? But that gets over really quickly. Once we get going, they're right there. Really, really wonderful experience.
They were a noisy bunch and they went quiet.
Yeah, both prisons, yeah.
Yeah, no, really.
And I have to say, the last one I understood had included a lot of Irish immigrants that were in Liverpool causing a lot of problems. Yeah, and they were saying they didn't know what to do with this gang of Liverpoolians that were Irish immigrants causing, and they brought them into Hull, and some of them were in there. So they were the ones probably giving me I don't even know who was who, but giving me a hard time. But eventually they all got into it. And one of the best writers did a rap. Remember, he did this. He did a wonderful rap, and it kind of had a Irish brogue with an English, Cockney connection. They were all. It was really amazing how they did their beautiful writing and work.
Yeah. Now, before taking some questions from the audience, I also wanted to ask about, most recently, you, Luis, have been involved in politics, running for governor, and have been on campaigns, several campaigns for working class, advocating throughout the state. So I'm wondering if that is covered in the book, but also, how your political life as a poet those intertwine, because I think I hear the phrase a lot that poetry can change the world, right? And hearing you say, you know, that when you're teaching writing, you're really giving keys to liberation. It's a sort of path into thinking rather than just teaching.
Well, I'm an abolitionist. I don't think we need prisons. But what are the conditions in which prisons don't matter? You got to create those conditions. Yeah. It isn't let's just open up all the prisons. It's creating conditions so that prison doesn't become the way you address people transforming and dealing with life or their issues, their trouble. You use the very trouble of their lives to make a life, but then people don't get that. When I ran for office, I ran mostly in the Green Party, and once in the Justice Party, I ran for Vice President of the U.S. with Rocky Anderson, and I ran for governor twice. In my campaign manager is Tony Prince, who writes about this stuff. He wrote something. We helped create a whole campaign around reenacting the End Poverty Now in California for the EPIC program that's Sinclair. Upton Sinclair created. And we wanted to reenact it because we thought poverty was the bottom line, that was it. And nobody was talking poverty. After that campaign, even though as a Green Party and, you know, there's no money, we weren't going to win, we changed, people started talking about this. And even now, okay, I'm not going to tell you, I don't really like any of the people running, I get all that, but I think it's important that now I'm hearing them say stuff, all these candidates that we used to say, and people thought we were nuts. You know what I'm saying? Like getting rid of ICE, all this other stuff that now I'm hearing people say, poverty and homelessness. I'm hearing it on the commercials. You know, we're gonna end homelessness. Well, that's what we were on campaigning for. But I get the idea that they're probably talking the talk and not gonna do it. But the fact that we help change the dialogue is part of the struggle. To help change that whole dialogue that now people are talking this stuff. Now we gotta make it really happen.
If I can add, I think his fame as an artist, as a public intellectual, was why people were listening, and I don't think that it's separate from, and I'm not a member of this party, but I'm not advocating it, but the Democratic Socialists did a massive growth, and I think that the normalization of this discourse is as Luis was saying, it has something to do with people getting beyond the Cold War where I grew up, where communism and socialism and all that is like satanic devil worship, whatever stuff, you know, it's like really can't even conceive. It's normalized because these folks were doing that hard work. And the essay that Prince writes is pretty amazing. And it's really thorough historical treatment of in the trenches of all this party organized, different political parties. There's actually a section where several of their comrades have written reflections about their own coming to consciousness, different organizations. It's a really good history story in that regard. So yeah, another reason to get that book. Yeah.
Well, and I have to add the Union of the Homeless because we restarted the Union of the Homeless after the first governor's campaign in Salinas and the encampments they had there in Chinatown. And me and Tony were right there. We met with the leaders and one of the main ideas of the Union of the Homeless, which Tony is now very much a leader and a visionary for that, is that the homeless themselves have the answers. That they themselves, the most impacted, have to make the change. Unlike a lot of people working with homelessness that were just trying to have a middle group of people to advocate for them. We're talking about the homeless themselves in the leadership, advocating, organizing, and dreaming and organizing the work that they're going to do.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Samuel. I wonder if there are any questions in the audience. Have a hand out in the back.
Yes, hello. Thank you, everyone that's up the front speaking and sharing. It's really important stuff. I have a question. I don't know for whom the question is. It's just that the question surfaces in my mind, given the talk and given my experiences. I wonder what your thoughts are about literacy for liberation. I think is how it was put just a few moments ago. What you're thinking is what literacy for liberation might be or ought to be these days, given that we're encountering a world, interacting with people for whom words are increasingly contained in digital algorithms. What does it mean? What does it mean to know how to read and write? What does it mean to read the world? In such a case, you know, I'm thinking about it because I don't know, it just seems to me that not only should we be able to read words and understand words and read the world, but I think that we should also recognize the grammar upon which words rest. And it seems to me that it's a lot easier to pursue that task when the words are on a sheet of paper. But what is the grammar of language? You know, who's controlling the grammar? Who's controlling the algorithms? And what is the relationship between that and the words that make their way either in the palm of our hand or on the computer screen?
Well, let me say something on that. First of all, that's Jose Prado, who's also got a paper in here, and really very good paper. I would have to say this: let's enhance or advance the whole idea of how people become literate. It isn't just learning words and being able to read the bus schedules and being able to maybe hear a commercial. They only train you 7th grade level so you can be a consumer. We're talking about a full competent literacy, which your agency, you're a human being able to figure things out, think through everything, critical thinking, all these things are part of what literacy has to be. And that's what's being denied the world. People are being given the lowest level, as you know, and that is being taken away. We're talking about a literacy that engages all aspects, even as going back to John, the whole idea of mythological imagination, opening up to something that what stories can do and how stories can help tell us more about what's going on than almost all the things you can get in the internet. I would like to see the opening up of our minds and our hearts and our spirits, where true competency comes in, and that it's not AI, artificial intelligence, but AI ancestral intelligence, that we can attach to something deeper than what people give us.
Anybody would like to add? No?
I would like to, can I piggyback off of that question that you asked, because I want to thank you for saying that you lead with the spirit. And I'm a kinder teacher, and before I show them how to read, I have to show them how to feel, how to read the feelings, how to read the body language. Right. And I often say that before a kiddo could start to be in my class, I have to check in with his heart. And I think that's what you're talking about. Beautiful. We have to show them how to be present, because so often they're not there because of other things that are happening at home. So I'm also an artist, so I think I go between both things. Yeah. And I think I'm a stronger artist because I'm a teacher, and I'm a better teacher because I'm an artist. And those two things exist within me. So thank you for existing in all these worlds, number one. And then I want to connect it back to in the prison aspect. I start my class with telling my kids to catch a cloud, like an imaginary cloud, if you will, and then the cloud whispers something to them. And we do this every day. And one of my kiddos just recently said, "Maestra, no puedo ver la nube. I can't see the cloud." So for some reason that day he couldn't imagine the cloud. We're talking about a 5-year-old. And I journal often after I teach, just as a reflection for myself. But I wrote down what happens when these prisons exist in the mind, because there was something that kept my student locked in a very specific place. And he's not in prison, he's 5, but in here they are. So I couldn't help to hear you all speak about this and think about what do we do with the prisons our children are born with, right? How do we unpack that? And maybe I'll find some answers there, but I just wanted to bring it to the table.
Well, everything you said had the answers right there. You really explained it. But I want to go back to an essay I wrote in that book, From Our Land to Our Land. It's called Man Tears, where I talk about being a sensitive Chicano kid. It was in my imagination. I like playing with my army men, my little troquitas, but also I play dolls with my sisters. I never thought about that as a big problem. But in the barrio, you couldn't do that. You know what I'm saying? You couldn't, even in the family, it was like, what's wrong with you? You're a guy. You know what I mean? I was a sensitive kid, like a lot of kids are. And sensitivity means that you're not just sensitive to the mind thinking, but also the heart thinking. Your other things are there. And I was found out one day I was playing dolls with my neighbor. I was 9 years old, not even a teenager. And a couple homies saw me playing dolls. That was the end of it for me. The next day, they beat the heck out of me. They knocked me to the ground. I was on the floor. They cracked my jaw, which is why I have a big chin. That eventually became my gang name, Chin de Lomas. That was my, I identified with my flaw, But the thing was, after that, I couldn't be the sensitive kid anymore. We're being uncultured or decultured or cultured away from who we are, our fullness of who we are. I had to be this tough, and I had to be this. I couldn't just pretend, couldn't play at it. Now I told myself, I'm 9 years old, I'm never gonna be in the ground for anybody ever again. 2 years later, I'm in a gang. 2 years after that, I'm going to jail. I'm doing violent acts. My voice was gone. My speaking was through violence, you know what I'm saying? My speaking was, I want to take on the world. I took on everybody that came at me, I tell people when I was 16 and I was in the murder's row at 16, first night I was there, I had a cell next to Charles Manson. They were protecting Charles Manson. He was the only white guy among all the black and brown people in the whole tier. They were protecting him. But the first night I was there, they put razor blades to my neck. Two guys, big guys sitting there, they put razor blades to my neck. They didn't care if I died. They were protecting me. If I woke up with my throat cut, who would care? You know what I'm saying? I had to learn, and I told my wife, Trini, it saved my life. I had to learn to step up to everybody. And I'm a 5'6", skinny, scrawny Chicano, but I didn't care. I was still big guys, muscular. I didn't care. I stood up to all of them. That's what you have to learn. But that distorts you. You know what I'm saying? It mutates you. And I think what you're talking about is the importance of classrooms being not this mutating monstrosity that we make out of our kids. They're becoming monsters, and I don't mean they're all going to be violent. Even when the ones who are quiet and silent and don't want to speak out and don't want to rock the boats, they're monsters. You know what I'm saying? The ones that go along with the programming, or by some of my family members who are now Trump supporters. Chihuahuenses, Tarumaras, doesn't matter, they're Trump supporters. What happened to that culturalization? So I really love what you said. You lead with your heart. We have many parts of us that have to be engaged. And that's what the spirit means. You engage all aspects because you want them to be fuller human beings, not mutated, cut off, distorted human beings.
Can I just add to that very quickly? I was just going to say you should read the chapter in From Our Land. Have you read it before? The chapter about Nemechtili, about the spirit of learning and spirit of teaching, which actually, Jose, you wrote about in your chapter as well, didn't you? But again, it feeds a lot into what you were saying. It's a really beautiful piece of writing. You should look at it.
Yeah, question over here.
So I was really excited by the mention of the Nobel Prize literature release. I'm going to manifest it and say, so when you get the prize, what will you use that platform to say? What could you imagine? Because the world will be paying attention. Can you imagine what you might want to say then?
Can you nominate us for a book award first before you say?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing. When I did get some money coming in, because I'm always winning, the royalties, and I got some fellowships, money was coming in, always winning, became a bestseller. It's very hard to get a bestseller in this country, and I'm one of the Chicanos that did. And we could have, me and my wife talked about it, we could have bought a swimming pool, we could have bought a Lexus, We decided, because soon after, the book came out in 93. By year 2000, we moved back to LA. But I was getting all these royalties were coming in, We decided to create a beautiful cultural space, Tía Chucha Centro Cultural and Bookstore. In Sylmar, working class Mexican Central American community. Sylmar in Northeast Valley in total is 500,000 people, 90% Mexican Central American, 10% is black, hardly any whites, but it's, and we decided to create a center there to do what we're talking about, opening up that spirit, the mind, the heart, everything, opening up human beings through art, through dance, through theater, through writing. We have all the arts. We have the only bookstore for 500,000 people. You know, because we recognize, Trini grew up there. She's from Pacoima. We recognize that there's liquor stores everywhere. You can get any drug you want. You can buy any gun, but you couldn't buy a book. So that's what I would do. If I get any more support, I don't know, whatever I get. I'm not really against prizes. I know I said that. I don't care for prizes. I'm okay with it, but then we use it. We use it to do what we always said to do. If it changes you, then you weren't really serious about who you are. It's got to enhance who you are, not change to the point where you're not who you are. So I think that whatever would happen, we would keep doing that, enhancing and giving to the community, because the community makes, like we always say, community is our mother. It feeds us. We got to go back to community always.
We began discussing this in an interview in Havana that we started in about 2019, and it's in the book. So there's even more discussion if you're interested. And it's an expensive book, but it's I think it's a very important document.
Yeah. Raise of hands who has been to Tía Chucha Centro Cultural. Okay, we got about half, but Celebrating Words Festival, is it coming up? It's coming up.
May 31st, I think. May 30th, it's coming up.
May 30th.
It's 3,000 to 5,000 people show up. It's free. We give 1,000 books free to people. All these kids, they line up with their parents. It's a beautiful event. We have poetry, we have music, we have all these community groups there. We have food, we have workshops. I'm going to be speaking to 50 high school kids that are going to bring a bus down there. And I just mentioned that to say it's our way, again, it's Tía Chucha's, our way of giving back. It's in Pacoima, right in the middle of the barrio there. And if you know Pacoima, you know that's a real barrio. You know, real migrant working class barrio, and that's why we give back wherever we can. That's why I go into prisons to give back. Whatever happens, we always gotta enhance and extend more who we are.
That's right. Yeah. Question over here.
Yeah. Thank you all for your wonderful words, and also for everyone who's been speaking so poetically and beautifully. I have a question about the sort of Ben, you were, and actually Joe as well. You were trying to situate Luis within the sort of Chicano landscape of literature, right? And Ben, what you were saying about the sort of professionalization of Chicano academics, right? I think also is true of Chicano writers to a certain extent. There's been a professionalization of the practice of becoming an author, right? Such that when you read Chicano literature today, oftentimes, those people, the author would have an MFA, right? And they've been professionalized to a certain extent. I wonder how you think that sort of institutionalization of not just Chicano studies, but rather also Chicano literature, has affected the sort of range of topics that are discussed in literature and the status of Chicano literature today, and what makes Luis maybe even more exceptional in sort of inside of that landscape.
Yeah, I concur with you about not just the professionalization of Raza literature, but the real containment within a progress narrative, with the success story, with happy endings. And we've been promoting this book. Joe's going to Bologna and to other places in Europe to continue this. And she came here to be here, but also at UCSB a few days ago. And one of the things I said there was that one of the things that distinguishes Luis is that he's not just a Chicano subject, right? He's global, but his literary heritage comes a lot also from his work in Central America and Latin America, and specifically through testimonial discourse. Testimonial discourse we know of through, the Christian practice, you tell a story, I was this and that, and now I found Jesus and I'm good now, or whatever. There's a materialist component to that was really unleashed in the 60s and 70s, really beginning with Che Guevara's testimonial about the Cuban Revolution. And it follows this structure. It tells a story not of an exceptional person like you get in the autobiographies and memoirs and a lot of Chicano writing today. It tells a story of an ordinary person, just like everybody else. There's nothing unique about me. I'm like everybody else. My experiences, especially the bad ones, are just like everybody else's. And they tell a story about failure after failure after failure, mistake after mistake after mistake. And it ends not with a happy ending. It doesn't end, okay, now everything's good, because that just wouldn't be real. And the Central Americans, especially in the genre of guerrilla testimonial, they were trying to teach you how to, one, be an ally, but also not make their mistakes, and to continue theorizing way to liberate. And it has to involve brutal honesty. And the most common experience is just not yet, no one's figured out freedom. Full emancipation of the human in relation to the cosmos and to all the species. So that's an ongoing thing. So when you read this stuff, even in the juvenile literature, I wrote about one of the young adult literature books that he has. He has several. It requires you to say, okay, I see now, I got to do something. When you close the book, it doesn't end there. It's kind of like the slave narrative. When you close the book, there's a statement that says, I'm not free till everybody else is free. So do something. That's the implication. And that's what we get here. That's what we have, this testimonial dimension to all the genres, the fiction and the nonfiction prose and the poetry. There's some terrible stuff, just like Tombstone Poets. Doesn't end happy, because that problem continues. And it's multidimensional. So that's what I would say. I think this is a different type of person who's not just an artist. And he's not gonna, I'm not gonna name any names, but there's an artist we both know, a Latino artist who would greet you and give you a card with their name on it, and it says writer. And God, you know, I can't, you know, that is just so pathetically self-absorbed. This guy won't do that. He probably doesn't even have cards. He's like, can I do something? Can I do something? I'm gonna hide it from you. All right, no. He won't. No. He'll give you his hand, you know, mano de obra, to help out. Yeah, there's no card and then it ends there and you call me for a gig and pay me a lot of money. You know, he's gonna get paid. He's got to get paid, but he's gonna do other stuff for nothing. Yeah, because and that's the most important thing. But anyway, so I agree and I appreciate that question. It's really important.
I've been processing it the whole time that I'm listening to everyone, so thank you. That's this question. How do you all think that we can probably initially individually and then collectively, I would say either reimagine or reform humanizing people in prison. And I say that from our own background, but I realize that a lot of human beings, we become fascinated, we're fascinated by people like us, people that go through pain, people that get high, people people are so fascinated by us, but they first look at us at the specific label of convict, gang member, drug addict. So how do you all think that we can begin to shift individual and collective consciousness to reimagine the word human being first, or spiritual being first? How do we get there? How do we get to first looking at someone and say, that's a spirit, that's an ancestral spirit? Because labels are so, seem to be so significant, right? And I think they take away from humanity. So how do we get there? Or how do you all think that we begin to get there?
Well, let me
Not
just.
looking at the label first.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think the only thing is, if you're in that, and I happen to live through it, but also constantly dealing with it, you realize, that's why I have that poem I read earlier where, from what polluted soils will my blossoms spring? You're not just going to get good things come from good things. Sometimes the so-called bad things is where poetry comes from, music comes from. That's where a lot of creativeness happens when crisis, personal crisis, social crisis. We're in a crisis in society, in a crisis that every institution is in crisis. It's not just political parties are in crisis, churches are in crisis, everybody's in crisis now. But through that, from there, is the seeds of the new idea, the new concepts, the new things. When a baby's born, something has to die, to be born. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't have to be the mother, and I get that, but part of what happens is something dies there as the baby's born. Well, that's the same with all of us. We're in crisis. That means something has to die, something has to be born. But if people don't understand that, they think they have to die. They think they become the scapegoats for the rest of us. They're the bad people. They took it on, so let's put them all away and let's forget about them. That's why I don't believe in that. It doesn't make sense to me to just write everybody off. No matter how hard, like my son, everybody told me, and my friends, everybody would know, leave him alone. Give him tough love. All this nonsense. It's nonsense. It's like, he's lost. He's gone. I remember people did that to me, but I wasn't lost. I looked lost. I see that. I looked like I was gone. But guess what? There was a seed that could be nurtured. My son had it too. I stood by him through everything. And I think that's important to know that all human beings have that capacity. They have the capacity to be destructive, self-destructive, all kinds of things, but they have the capacity to be the future, to be the light, to be something different. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's what you got to work with. And I work with the murderers, and we know some of the people. He's talked to guys who people would never talk to them in the time of day, but now they're out there doing good stuff, who've been 38 years, one of them did. Others 20, 30 years, who are now out there changing the world. You know what I'm getting at, is you can't write anybody off. Can you hope that makes sense? You can't write nobody off. People wrote me off. And I'm not, if you could see me, and I look at us now, we're talking about this. Do I deserve a book like that? Probably not. But the point is, people wrote me off. I was in pretty bad shape. But at the same time, I think that's the world that we're in. There's no more idea that that's why I say it's not AI, artificial intelligence. Ancestral intelligence, tapping into genetic memory, tapping into what your wholeness that you already have, you can begin to bring wholeness into the world.
Sorry, do you want to go ahead? No, go ahead. I was just going to add a couple of observations. That's a really interesting question. Just from the point of view of being an academic, it's been quite interesting, quite eye-opening, being moved into a criminology department, because I'm not a trained criminologist. I'm not a trained social scientist, but there's clearly been some quite decisive moves over the past few years, whereby previously people in prison might be labelled purely as participants in a research project, but there's been a lot more work in recent years about some sort of, they're calling it knowledge equity, like more kind of equal workings between people in prison or people who are formerly incarcerated, being embedded more in research projects, so they're not simply participants anymore. So it's just an observation that I think there's a lot more work to be done by academics and the academy in that field, to certainly not simply treat people in prison or formerly incarcerated as those research participants. They need to be seen as human beings who are involved with the research project in very important ways. And the second comment I was just going to add to that, which doesn't quite answer your question, but again it made me think of conversations we've had with Luis before, is I think the publishing industry has a lot to answer for and needs a lot of work to be done in terms of, particularly with some of the prison literature, for example, that I study, or some of the gang memoirs that I've looked in the past. It's very much been the market, hasn't it, to advertise not necessarily the redemptive ending, but to very much focus on the fact that someone was a gang member or in prison to start with. And again, particularly in the early 90s, looking at how the publishing industry marketed Always Running and some of the others like Monster and some of the others that came out then as well. Again, I think that you can comment on this, the publishing industry certainly made strides, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done along those lines as well. Is that fair enough?
People have even said I got published because I wrote about gangs. You know, it's like, well, they don't mind Chicanos being gangsters because that's what they always do. It could have been part of that, you know. I mean, when do you ever see Chicanos in movies or in culture except as gangsters or something, you know? So anyway, the idea was somebody says, well, maybe that's why they published. That's why it became a bestseller. Maybe partly true, but I'm also, there's a seed in there that's not about the criminality aspect. It's not about that. It's about what the transformation aspect of a human being is also indicative of the bigger picture. Can we transform this world? You know what I'm saying? If you can talk about transforming a former addict, jailbird, a homeless guy in the street with nothing going for him, and then you can do that of society too. You know what I'm saying? That we're the micro of the macro. If we can look at it that way, we're not just individuals changing. We also can think about, why does the world have to be this way? You know, as you know, in indigenous societies, they say there was no prisons, there was no homeless. Why did they take care of people that didn't belong and they didn't feel they belonged? They found ways to deal with them, incorporate them, you know, there's a lot of ways that they thought of. We call it restorative justice. We call it, you know, we call it peacemaking with the Navajo. It's the way that we go. I worked in the Navajo with 2 cases. One, a guy who murdered the Navajo police officer. And the families knew each other. And they wanted to get him under the state prison system so he can get the death penalty. And the Navajo tribe came in, no, we're gonna try him under the tribal laws and we'll get him to the federal system. At the time wasn't a death penalty. He was 16 years old when he did that. And we're gonna help change his life. And the families got together and agreed. Families that lost a family member because of the 60-year-old kid on crystal meth who choked this police officer and killed him. That kid came out with a lot of care, a lot of love, a lot of support of age 21. Now he's like age 50, about the age of my son, a little younger, doing really well. They were going to throw him away. The other case was, we did ceremony. It wasn't legal. It was all a ceremony. A young Navajo woman, drunk, ran over a 9-year-old kid and killed her in front of her parents, in front of his parents. He was a little young boy. The parents were devastated. It was awful. We took it to ceremony. The parents were there with the young Navajo girl who had killed this kid. It was painful, it was tearful. There was a lot of stuff. All night long, all night prayer meetings, they call them. All night long we were there. In the morning, they were hugging each other. You have to see this to believe it. This is just a moment. Can you imagine if we did it consistently? And then those parents agreed to almost adopt this young lady and help her through her recovery, make sure she was completely recovered and never go back to drinking. The lady that killed her kid. There's other ways to look at this, to imagine this, and then live it out. And that's what we're trying to give to the world. Imagine something different and do something different. Not just the same old thing. Somebody hurts me, I'm gonna hurt them. You know, that's why we're in Iran and people are dying, little kids are dying. Everything's all destruction. The whole idea that I suffered once, now you're all gonna suffer after me. The idea of the what's happening in Gaza, you know what I'm saying? That's why we have to step up for Gaza. Step up for anybody that gets pushed out and destroyed and forgotten. You don't belong. Because we got to make a world in which everybody belongs.
Yeah, that's why we did this book, you know, to get this out, to get this philosophy out. Hope you put that down because it speaks to the other part of what Juan Carlos just got his PhD recently as well. Congratulations.
There you go.
On a dissertation on Chicana prisoners. There's not been one yet. All in Chicana prison are writers, and he created part of that archive. But the other part you're talking about is the commodification of this of this villain, and that is powerful. But when we get these stories out, just like what he was saying, I haven't seen you writing thing about these 2 cases, but this restorative justice paradigm in a real-world context. That pushes against that commodification. You know, the work that you've done pushes against the commodification. The work you do with Gina Almaraz, great poet and beautiful person. So I don't know if she's read here before or not, but anyway, that's why we did this book, because of this type of mindset and spirit.
Yeah, we have time for 2 more questions. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I really don't have a question. I wanted to say something about the book, but I'll wait for that.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say, first of all, I want to thank Ben and Joe for the 5 years that they put into this project. Now, when I was asked to write something for the book, and my understanding was that it was going to be a literary criticism of Louis's work over the decades. And I said, well, I'm no literary critic, that's for sure. So I don't know what I can contribute here. So yeah, but we want to have something about his life, a little bit about his political activity and some of the practical stuff you guys did. And so I said, okay, that's fine. And I did the best I could with that. But what they have produced here is something that doesn't happen very often. And I want to urge everyone in this room to buy this book because this book does something which is not done sufficiently or regularly enough with outstanding individuals. And that is to show the path of development, to see, as we've discussed here today, of the diversity that's within Louis and the diversity of the world that's reflected in all the things that influence Louis and his writing. And I think that it's very important that we understand, they're coming up with a movie, I guess, Christopher Nolan's making a movie about Ulysses now, right? We're all gonna be thinking about mythology. If you read some of these myths and mythology, and some of these people that participate, especially Ulysses or Odysseus, as he's known in Roman mythology, that there's always a point at which someone is told, go this way, but don't turn around and look back. Because if you look back at the person that's following you, a bad thing is going to happen. Now that's obviously wrong, because you do need to look back. It's important to look back. It's important to look back and learn. And not just to learn, but to learn not just what happened, but the essence of what happened in order to chart the path forward. Because it's also true that there is truth to not just looking back or being so focused on the past that you're not looking forward. This book, this anthology, is about looking forward right now. Not looking forward 10, 15 years from now, right now. I can't emphasize enough how important that is. And I couldn't avoid saying something here because Louis and I, and Trini, and Dan Henriksen, and all of us who kind of came up together as children, as kids, this is kind of something special for us. And we are honored to be part of this today. I'm honored to be part of this. I think that the truth of what Louis just said about the humanity, about becoming, we are human beings, but sometimes we're treated as if we're not. We're just victims. We're powerless to do anything about anything. But that's not true. And that's what this book reflects. The authors of this book tell those stories and do the particular visions that they have. So, now I don't have a photo credit on that picture, but I took that picture.
And that's my son Ramiro, that's now 51 years old, who we've been talking about. Yeah.
He's my godson and Louis' godfather, my daughters, and so are interconnected, and Trini and Dan, and I met John Densmore when we had the 2014 campaign, another influence in Louis' life, and by the same token, someone who's been influenced by all that Louis has done. That's the nature of making change, is to find the humanity within all of us, the ability to change things as we change, if you think about it. That's what life is, that's what society is and ought to be. And they used to have an advertising slogan in New York called, they had a kind of bread you could get, it's Jewish rye bread, called Levi's bread. I don't know if you guys know about Levi's bread. The advertising campaign was, you don't have to be Jewish to love Levi's. You don't have to be a Marxist, you don't have to be a communist to appreciate that it's necessary to have a scientific perception of what's going on, to have an understanding of how the serious juncture at which we are at right now, and to make in our own ways, individually, like this brother was saying, individually and collectively, to make that change. Every single contribution is necessary. No one contribution is more important than another contribution. What is important is we all make that contribution in whatever way that is. So I want to thank you guys. Urge everyone to go out there and buy that book and read that book and learn from that book and then make your own history. help us all collectively make the kind of history we need to make at this critical juncture, that we're at right now. So
thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you for it. Yeah, for being here. Yeah, I do have to say that the book is very expensive, and I don't mind saying it because it's. But the reason why I recommend you getting a book like this, I didn't know that some of my books now, because it's a weird thing about society, how they treat you like really badly, and then they make you this iconic thing. So some of my books are collector's items, or people are paying $3,000 for them. What the heck? Who are these people? I don't get it. I don't know. I wouldn't do that. This book is expensive, but it's really worth it, and it's going to be a collector's thing, if that means anything to you. If not, it's just going to be a book that you can go back to over and over again and interact with and learn from, and maybe push yourself out into the world in the way you need to be pushed out there in the world. It's mixed in with, like I think was being said, with a lot of cultural baggage and stuff. Even when I ran for governor and everything, you're mixed in with that. But it was all worth it. It's all worth it to get into that world with something different than what that world is willing to accept. And so that's what this book says, so thank you.
But also know, again, I know it's about, I think it's $125 or $130. It's going to be in paperback soon. For those who can. We still want to, move a few of these books out, but it's going to be accessible, and we're getting, and the reason, the first run is always hardback, and those because the libraries are buying them, and that's why. But it's selling a lot of books, and so they're going to do it in paperback. And just to be clear, we don't get any. If we get $100 royalty for that's going to be a miracle, because it's like that's not why we did this. So we're not like trying to sell the book to make money. That's not. We'd have to sell billions of books or trillions probably. But no. But it's got a lot of touchstones, and you put it really well that there's so many angles and entryways to this. So it's there, and if you can't get this one, just be in paperback, and if not, steal it from the library so they can buy another one.
And John Gensmo did the preface. He didn't even know he did the preface, but he did the preface. No, the forward, whatever it is. I don't know. All right. And Trini wrote something. That was the hardest thing for her to do. You should have seen it. The struggle.
Best piece there. Beautiful. Best piece there, and only one revision. Everybody else has lots of them. Only one, and that was just like. And the only reason, because she wanted to add something. That's the only reason. So that's like crystalline.
Prophetic, yeah. Just want to say, also as a student of, I went to Cal State Northridge, and there a few courses taught some of Luis's poetics. It was part of Chicanx studies, not necessarily in English. So there is a difference in the kind of coursework that we read. And I would say that this is as much American literature as any other white author that you read out there. But I think that does speak to the abolitionist praxis and the refusal, that willpower to refuse weaponized language, language that is being fed to you, that is being prompted to you. There is power in refusing that, and that creates another capability. It creates another possibility, and yeah, I mean that, not to be corny, but it does tie it to the possibilities of language. We say a lot here, but yeah, there is power in that, and I think Luis's work has always been the alternative and the other option to not just accepting what another person thinks you should be reading, but rather making that choice that you are picking up a book that speaks more to your surroundings, to what you have grown up with. And yeah, it means a lot to be sitting here, with these editors, with Luis, and just know that there is a future, and I'm sure students like myself will be reading this and writing even more essays about it, and non-AI generated essays. That is really scary. It's a really complex system that is dangerous because it's being fed to us by all kinds of agencies and entertainment that you cannot escape it. But there is refusal that we can bring about and connect it to our own ancestry. Like you were saying, it's in our genetics and the power of critical thinking. So yeah, this book is available. This book and many other of Luisa's works are in our bookstore as well. So I want to thank everyone for being here. Round of applause to everyone. Yeah.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Luis will be signing books if you want. There's other stuff. Just look at the bookstore. There's a lot of good stuff. And if by any chance you have a little bit extra, there's a book that I have on the Venceremos Brigade. We use it to raise funds to send students to Cuba. It's very important now. Yeah, and we do volunteer labor and educational exchanges. It was started in '68. They used to meet with the VC there. Viet Cong, and there's that trajectory, right? It still continues, and so that's what that is for. I don't get any money. That money goes to the Venceremos Brigade's Youth Fund. So just so you know, but if you haven't, if you're a little low right now, get that one first.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.